Evening. How's it going, everybody? So, catching up on some of these Time Rabbit, Darth Dawkins videos, and now I finally made it to the one I was really looking forward to reviewing because this one features Darth at his best, which is to say his worst. Um, so I don't know any context to this one other than he was having a conversation on Discord, and the guy that he's having a conversation with goes by the username Mathematician. That's pretty much it. Mathematician seems like a cool customer, pretty inflappable throughout the entire thing. Other than occasionally, maybe giggling about something that Darth says really doesn't crack at all. And Darth, for that reason, maybe for others, decides to continue talking to him. One of the things that I'm a little bit, I think actually happens with this one. I think that when Darth is talking to him, I think he he sees Mathematician as somebody that's a lot less informed about the Bible and Christianity and Islam than Darth is. That is to say that Mathematician is not as informed about what evangelical fundamentalist pastors and apologists say about the Bible, Christianity, and Islam. So that's going to be enough for him. With that being said, let me say hi to some people here in the chat. Rock Josiah. Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen you for a live one. Thanks for showing up. The Monk, 8:30. Errant, Michael Deaton. Thank you for the reminder there, Michael. Doubting Thomas. I think you broke it. Well, maybe I've probably been babbling for a minute, so yeah, that F word's fine. But good to see you, Thomas. John Fabiano's here. JL wants 7-minute epistemology. I think you could do it. I think they've been working on it. Cloud Odin, God equals. Let's see, Whirlybird. Greetings and prevarications. Greetings, Whirlybird. I don't know that I've ever seen you in the live chat. If it's your first time, welcome. If I haven't noticed, I apologize. You try to obfuscate your prevarications as circumspectified as can. Oh, that's good. Wilberforce. Yeah, I did have a little issue with the bird feeder outside. The bird feeder's going. That's all there is to it. Moved into a new place. I've got a balcony. Could be lovely. Got a little eye hook above there, which I'm pretty sure was probably for a plant. I was stupid and decided, let's bring nature closer to my place. Put a bird feeder on there. Pretty decent one by all accounts. Today, I had to clean it. It's been up there for probably 2 months. I think I've been here about 2 months, and it was getting a little nasty. You have to clean those things, otherwise you can turn your bird feeder from a soup kitchen into a hot zone. And yeah, it doesn't clean well. And the one that I have pretty much requires like a hose and outdoor equipment that also I don't have access to. So that was frustrating. And on top of that, while handling it, while putting it back together after cleaning it, some of the key components fell off, which was incredibly annoying. Normally, I would break the device. I would get frustrated and then wring it out or smash it against a tree or something like that. And so I could say, this thing broke because I lost my cool with it, because I will lose my shit over inanimate objects. I cannot stand poorly engineered things. If they give me any inconvenience, heaven forfend they cut me. If I get hurt monkeying around with one of these things, I will destroy it. This didn't happen in this case. I didn't break it. It just fell off, and of all things, fell into the food. So now it's in a small little bird food silo, and I don't know if it's ever going to come back. My suspicion will be one of the birds, while fishing around in one of the feed holes, will pull that out and spit it out, and it will be gone forever. So this may be the last time they feed out of that. I'm replacing it with some wind chimes. That's how I'm going to roll. And then I'm going to bleach the deck so I can sit back out there, because now it's covered. It's about 50-50 white and gray. It was 100% gray, and now you can imagine what the white is. Yeah. If you feed birds, feed them way away from yourself. It's just not worth having them around. That and the raccoon that showed up. He was very thankful that I was feeding them. I wasn't thankful that if he tried to climb on my screen door, he could probably pull it off. And part of the wall. Huge. Anyway, that was a tangent. Let's see. Sikis here. Good to see you. Josephus. I'm probably going to miss somebody. Daisy is also here. Reconator. Good to see you. Kokos. Managed to catch it live, and it's only midnight. It's midnight where you're at, so you're 12 hours, you're 6 hours ahead. Does that put you in Germany, somewhere in that area of the world? I'm thinking. Clive Gordon, good to see you. And I think that's almost everybody. I don't want to. Peter Guns, Babyfoot, me, or I should say you. I'm going to keep doing that every time. Christy Ham, DBT, Russ Wren. And Poland, already told you. I know you already told me, but I knew I was going to get it wrong. So, but yeah, 6 hours ahead of me. That sounded like, okay, well, that's actually Eastern European time. You're actually not as far ahead as I would have thought. I would have thought there'd been another time zone in there somewhere, but okay. Shows what I know about geography. So yeah, nothing really to put into perspective on this one. Like I said, this one is from about 8 days ago. Tom was pretty impressed with the way this guy talked with him. I will put this out there. I don't know that I was really all that impressed with Mathematician, or the fact that he has a remarkable skill for just staying completely calm while Darth is like, hollering at him. But this is mostly like Darth kind of like just volunteering a lot of stuff that's really, well, it's obviously wrong to anybody that's been kind of looking at this stuff or talking about this stuff for a long time. I don't think Mathematician knows that much about some of the stuff, but he also doesn't seem to care about it either. And he seems to be approaching Darth Dawkins with the attitude like, look, I understand that you're presenting some information and making some claims, but I'm not convinced that you're right about any of this because you seem kind of like a loon. So that's safe. That's smart. So I'm in Eastern Standard Time, Daisy. So not the East Coast, but I'm over in the Midwest. I'm in Michigan. So, all right. Let's find out where that's at. There we go. Perfect. And increase the size of that. All right. Here we go, folks. So usual rules are going to apply on this. If you can't hear anything, yell at me. Otherwise, we should be good to go. So here we go. Let me push this forward until we get here. All right.
Keep in mind that the reason why, Muslims have to be very careful with their criticisms of Christianity is because the overlap between their theology and Christian theology, and so they try to find ways to undermine Christian religion, but
unless you're
in their attempt, their attacks, I think, are very weak because they have to be.
These people anyway.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. Is he saying Muslim apologists? Their attacks have to be kind of weak. I'm not sure. I like this disclaimer. Playing Darth drinking games can cause serious alcohol poisoning, liver, and kidney damage. Yeah, there are a few of you who have told me that they are legends when it comes to liquor. And I mean, still, you take your fate into your own hands. But yeah, be careful. If you've got like your bingo card and you're turning that, like, do people do drinking bingo? I guess that could get kind of dangerous too. Huh. Wonder about that. Fabio is here. It's midnight here, and I can grant you another 15 minutes. No pressure. Thank you, Fabio. It's good to see you here. Spooky only came for the shout out, and now I've given him the shout out. Spooky is here, so. So Canadian geese were on Jefferson's patio. There have been no geese yet. Maybe later. I'll keep you posted. I wouldn't count it out. Okay. So now Darth is going to get into. It's interesting. Matt Slick was there too, or at least maybe somebody pretending to be Matt Slick. So Darth's going to go off on a little bit of an attempt to educate people about Islam.
Anyone who's not brainwashed by Islam can easily see by an evaluation of it, to see that it's just a complete bastardization of Christianity by some word in the Arabian Peninsula.
So it's a complete bastardization by some warlord in the Arabian Peninsula. I think this is interesting when Christians do this to Muslims, and sometimes you'll hear Muslims do this to Christians, but I hear it more from Christians to Muslims. Christians will say, hey, you atheists out there, you skeptics, when you say dismissive and reductive things like the Bible was simply cobbled together by ignorant Bronze Age goat herders or something like that. You know that's not actually what the tradition was, and you know that there's more to it than that. There was a whole scribal tradition. There's the cultures supporting like the Old Testament, obviously, the ancient Israelites, yada, 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 yada. And to that extent, they have a fair point. That is a good one. I don't think that it's really helpful to just kind of like try to, minimize the impact of either the New Testament or the Old Testament in that way, because I don't think it really adds anything to it. Darth is engaging in the exact same thing. He's just directing it at the Islamic community. Oh, it's just a bastardization of the Christian tradition, from some Arabian warlord, some warlord from the Arabian Peninsula. Okay, neat. Go on.
I think that's a little unfair. I think you might be able to get away with it.
It's spot on. There's no
It's not
plan. But let me tell you why it is. Okay. It's a bastardization because he didn't even understand the correct representation of the doctrine of the Trinity in order to condemn it.
This is not true, because this is a common kind of counter. It's an apologetic used by Christians against Muslims to say that, hey, there's a problem with Islam because the guy that you credit with having come up with the Quran didn't understand what the Trinity was before he started criticizing it. That's essentially where Darth's going with this. He's done this before. He's said this many times. I'm going to let this play out a little bit, and then we'll get into a little bit more. Howdy, Paul D. Paul says Muslims have a script, and they all repeat it. They believe the Bible has been corrupted, and based on that, they believe it makes Islam true because they believe the Quran has never been changed. Yes, that's going to come up a little bit later as an aspect to a point that Darth leaves out. So hold that thought. Yeah, his mic is shit now. You're talking about me, or oh no, okay. It is me, or is it me, or has Darth's audio quality slipped considerably since he got evicted from Mom's basement? Yes, it has.
He made a massive historical blunder when criticizing the doctrine of the Trinity.
He didn't.
When I say his blunder wasn't simply because he objected to it or said that it was wrong. He characterized what he thought was the Christian doctrine of the Trinity. He thought that the Trinity consisted of Allah, Jesus, and Mary.
Nope.
Okay? Now, that's a bastardization of the Christian doctrine. There's no plan of salvation. He didn't even understand.
Okay, so let's before he gets into the whole salvation thing, which is also incorrect. There is, I believe, let's take a look here and see where I can find that. Apologies, folks. This is actually from no, I can't find it. It looks like it disappeared on me. So there's actually a surah in there that's talking about this. The misunderstanding, and I think he'll mention this again, the primary misunderstanding that Darth believes that Muhammad had with talking about the Trinity was that he's criticized. Obviously, in Islam, they're Unitarian. They believe there's just one God, and it's Allah. They don't believe in these kind of co-equal persons, the Holy Spirit and the Son. They just don't do that. And so their criticism of it is that, look, that idea, this idea of any kind of co-divinity or anything like that as separate persons, is anathema to like the basic concept of an absolute God. And theologically, they may have a pretty good point there. What Darth goes on to say is like, hey, their problem with that is they go on to say that Mary, Jesus's mother, is one of the members of the Trinity. Darth believes that Muslims get this wrong and that the Quran gets this wrong. It doesn't. It just doesn't. in the Islamic tradition, they acknowledge that the Trinity, according to Christians, is God the Father, Jesus the Son, and a Holy Spirit. So Darth, as far as I know, has never been able to substantiate this other than by going to the Surah, I think it's Surah 12 something, maybe it's Surah 5. There's a little bit of a conversation if Jesus were to say to Allah something about Mary and him being equal to worship or something like that. And that seems to be where some of these apologists get this from. I don't know how they get it from that, because if you read it in context, it's clearly not talking about, like, it doesn't, there's no entailment that would lead to Muslims thinking, oh, well, see, here the Quran seems to think that Mary and Jesus are the other two in the Trinity, and that's not what it's claiming. So Darth is just completely wrong about that. Now he's talking about there's no salvation in Islam.
The nature of monotheism versus polytheism of the Christian doctrine, instead of Allah, Jesus, and Mary. Okay, now that's a bastardization of the Christian doctrine.
It would be if they did it, but they haven't done that. They never did. There are commentators. There have been commentators on the Quran that have made claims that could be taken out of context this way, or maybe they've kind of tried to include, like, well, in the same way that that other clerics and scribes have been, and imams have been critical of the Trinity. One of the things they also wrap into there is certain sects, Catholicism, and their veneration of the mother, the Mother Mary. And it's interesting because if you read some of their criticisms about how Catholics honor and venerate the Mary, the mother of Jesus, they are very similar points to the ones evangelical fundamentalist Protestants will make about their issues with the Catholic Church, praying to Mary and venerating her and honoring her, etc. So they actually might have more in common here in terms of criticism on Mary. The one thing that they don't do is assume that she is the third part of the Trinity. That is something that apologists have fucked up and misunderstood when they're criticizing Islam, and they think that they've scored a point. They're like, how can you even begin to criticize a thing without even being able to, accurately define what the thing is? But they're the ones that are screwing up how the Islamic tradition is defining the Trinity by reading into one surah, one verse in a surah, and claiming that this is the Islamic understanding of the Trinity, that it's the Father, the Son, and then Mary, the Mother / Holy Spirit, or something like that. That is simply not the case. And I would demand that somebody like Darth Dawkins establish how they ground how they're getting this, short of just blatantly misrepresenting Islamic ideology or Islamic theology. JL writes, fucking hilarious that Darth thinks he can make that claim about Muhammad's direct mental state, yet criticizes old earthers because, quote, they weren't there to see it form, so it's just an assumption. Right. Right.
There's no plan of salvation. He didn't understand the nature of monotheism versus polytheism.
Well, why would you have to understand? I'm pretty sure they do. The criticism of the Trinity isn't about them. I don't think that in Islamic tradition, it's about directly equating the Christian Trinity with notions of of polytheism. I think the idea is that it's dangerously close to it, and that they just don't see how it couldn't be anything other than a contradiction. It would somehow contradict or weaken the definition of God or Allah as a unified one power. Trying to break it up into three and then still saying it's one seems contradictory. The idea here, Darth just like slips us out. They don't have a plan for salvation. If by salvation Darth means they don't have a Messiah, he's absolutely correct. I don't think that in Islamic theology anywhere there's any talk of an anointed one. However, that being said, the anointed one or the Messiah in Christianity is not the same as the Messiah or Mashiach in Judaism. So that's not necessarily an issue just because, these guys don't have a salvation plan. You are saved in Islam by reading the Quran and doing what it tells you. It's similar to Judaism. You abide by the revealed text that you have, and you do what you're instructed to do within the faith tradition. It's a lot more direct than what you get with Christianity, where in Christianity you are instructed to choose to believe, which is an impossibility. You should believe in this thing, and if you do, you get everlasting life, which you don't. I mean, you could maybe, but that is an impossible thing to ask somebody. You just have to decide that you think that you're convinced of this, and it will be so. Cool. As soon as I can find a way to affect my neurology, I'll get right on that. In the meantime, I remain skeptical. So Darth's wrong here. There is a plan for salvation in Islam. It's just not exactly like the salvation scheme in Christianity, in that it doesn't have a savior in it. And that seems to be the only way he could really criticize this. Saying that they don't have a salvation mechanism built within there is patently false.
Okay. So there's no plan of salvation. Okay. I mean, it's very easy to see how Islam is just the fabrication of some guy talking extemporaneously.
How is that obvious versus what you get from, like, in some ways he might be onto something in the fact that, like, that just sort of basically makes these claims. Christians, I think, believe that because some of the people that have written texts in the New Testament use mimesis to harken back to things that they pulled out of the Old Testament, that this somehow makes a better claim for it. You know, that they've cited something else. The interesting thing about this is that they've cited a religion that Christians also have a lot of animosity about, because Judaism rejects Christ as well. So it's kind of a weird thing to say, like, well, hey, the writers of the New Testament, when we read these books, we know that they were revealed by God. Really? How do you know that? Well, because of the history, blah, 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 blah. Christians think that they get this because they can project the narrative of salvation and the Messiah and the dying for our sins back onto the books of the Old Testament. If you don't do that and you're a Jew, well, then you're destined for hell, as far as the Christians are concerned. So this doesn't make Darth's point. This is actually things are much, much worse for Darth here theologically than I think he knows. So this is bad. Let's see. Is a plan of salvation necessary? One would think so. Well, remember, Darth thinks that history is essentially laid out as God's redemptive plan for man. Good to see you, Maya. Thanks for being here. So yeah, I mean, there's got to be a plan for salvation.
Day after day, right? And then it's written down. Do you know that there's no thematic order in the Quran? Do you know that
this is also false?
There's no chronological order. We're just arranged by the size of the books.
Nope, that's wrong. They're not just arranged by the size of the books. They are not arranged according to what they believe to be the quote-unquote revelation that was granted to Muhammad. That much is true. However, they are arranged, for the most part, according to size, largest to smallest. But it turns out that the way that arrangement works for them, the largest book, the first surah, it contains basically like everything that sets up everything else that you need to know in the following surahs. And so most of the entry passages to that are things that get repeated, and they're even relatively well known, or at least familiar sounding to people who never came up in that faith tradition. The reason that they're also arranged that way is to facilitate. They believe that by arranging them largest to smallest in that way facilitates memorization, because the Quran was not written down; it was transmitted through rote memorization, and they believe it is there's a divine representation in the Quran for out of two reasons. The fact that these things were not revealed to Muhammad necessarily in that order, but when arranged from largest to smallest, they provide not only the best avenue to transmit the complete Quran as a mnemonic and for people to memorize it, but it also transmits it according to its theological themes. Those also correspond. They hold this to be kind of like this is a sign and a symbol of the Quran's perfection and a evidence of its miraculousness. Darth has just flat out fucked this up. Oh, they just arranged them from biggest to smallest. I would put to Darth, well, if that is a disqualifier, if just arranging books from big to small somehow is a disqualifier, then when the New Testament arranges the letters of Paul from largest to smallest, what does that say about the accuracy of the Pauline epistles? They're not arranged chronologically, not in terms, they're not arranged chronologically in the way, in the time that they were written, or in the narratives that they reflect, also because only 7 of them are undisputed. Several of them are forgeries, especially the pastoral epistles. Those ones are definitely not written by Paul. First and second, was it Titus, and First and Second Timothy.
Did you know that, Mathematician?
He doesn't need to know that, because that is irrelevant. Saying like, well, the Quran's not even, that's not even arranged in any particularly good order. Like, it is. Darth's just talking nonsense.
I think somewhat you're projecting.
There's no projecting here. How am I
Yeah, there
projecting?
is. Because a lot of your
Because if the idea of them being presented in an out of whack order or something, like, oh, they simply arranged by size, so were Pauline epistles. You know, they're not thematic, right? Yes, they are. Well, okay, you're done. Darth's he's out. Like, at that point, like, stop talking about the Quran. You don't know what you're fucking talking about. I don't know what I'm fucking talking about. I did not come up in the Muslim tradition, and I understand this shit better than him. This is not hard to figure out. Darth got this stuff from, like, I don't know, Ken Ham or some shit. Maybe that Greg Locke guy that talks about witches. Scott Duke, all of deity's criticisms are completely ad hoc and irrelevant. All anyone would have to say is that Allah willed it to be that way. Nothing deity says a requirement for superior faith. Yeah, you could do that too. Darth flat out effing it up, par for the course. Yeah, he really is doing a bad job here.
criticisms of Islam also apply to like your own religion.
Oh, no, it doesn't. Give me an example how it applies.
What's your chronology, and how do you determine that chronology?
Okay. Have you read the Bible?
Yes.
Okay. What we have in the Bible is a chronological sequencing from Genesis to Revelation. Now, it's not
According to whom?
listen to me carefully. Okay. Now, we don't have an absolute chronology there, I mean chronological order, but the Bible books are generally in a chronological order.
Okay, I'm going to let him. Let's see.
Historically speaking, there's
What do you mean
historically speaking?
Historically speaking, be more specific than that.
Yeah, we have the Genesis account, the creation account. Then we have God's dealing with Adam and Eve's children. Then we have God dealing with Noah. Okay? Then Abraham. Then Moses. Then we have God dealing the nation of Israel. Then we have God dealing
with the
prophets, dealing with the history of Israel. Okay, these are all chronological.
Okay, so basic Bible, some basic Bible study stuff for Darth Dawkins here. So let's just stick with the books he's talking about. We'll just stick right now with the Old Testament. The way that the Christian Old Testament is arranged is different than the way the Hebrew Bible is arranged. People know, most people here are going to know, that there's clearly different books included or omitted from between the two. But for the most part, they're pretty much the same. But the Torah, or the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, which just gives you, is, you know, essentially some of the books of the Old Testament, consists of the Torah, the prophets, and the writings. 3 big sections. And it is arranged by the Torah, the first 5 books, that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, and then the prophets, which contains not only the writings of the prophets, those books named after them, but it also contains what in the Christian tradition they would call the histories. That would be like 1st and 2nd Samuel, which in the Hebrew Bible is just Samuel, and those books are also included in there. And then you get the writings, which is going to include things like Job, the Song of Solomon, etc. Those are last. The way they're rearranged, so normally what you will get in the Old Testament, the Christian, the Hebrew Bible, you get the first 5 books, you get the writings, you get the prophets all kind of in a lump, I think they're interspersed with some of the historical books, or the historical books come after, and then you get and then the writings will come in the last section. So it's arranged in threes. In the Christian Old Testament, the way that it's arranged, you get the first 5 books, Genesis through Deuteronomy. Then you get the historical books from the prophets section from the Old Testament. Those are put first. And the reason they're done that way is to enhance a narrative, to make the narrative seem continuous from Adam and Eve all the way through, even though there's bits and pieces that pop up throughout those writings. Then you get into the prophets, and those might bounce around. I don't think that they're arranged in any kind of narrative order, but to some degree, I think in the Christian Old Testament, they are. I don't know that it matters in the Hebrew Bible. I think in the Hebrew Bible, if I remember this correctly, the prophets' writings may be arranged from largest to smallest. Maybe. I may be getting that wrong, but I think that is how the prophets are arranged. And then you have the writings interspersed between their where they pop up in the Christian Old Testament with regards to like where the prophets are. I don't know like what exceptions there are there. But the emphasis of the Christian Old Testament is on the narrative, is producing an historical narrative, whereas the Hebrew Bible, that's a little bit less emphasized, and the emphasis is more on thematics, which is the part that he seems to miss with the Quran. The Quran is arranged in a thematic way. Even though they're arranged from largest to smallest, Muslims believe that preserves a thematic transition and a way of going from the largest, the first surah, which kind of gives you everything that you need to know to get started. And from that is the foundation you build on leading into the following surahs. So it's thematic. This idea that he's talking about is absolutely dumb, because when he says stuff like this, like, oh, it's chronological and it's historical. Historical in what way? Genesis was not written but necessarily before Deuteronomy. Aspects of it probably were. But most of those books are cobbled together from various different sources, and the way that they end up getting assembled, they are not put in the order that they were written. They're being placed in a thematic and a contextual order that was significant for the Jewish people, especially those first 5 books. The idea that, like, this idea that he's talking about, I think that one of the things that will usually come up, there are Christians that do believe this. They think, well, it's Genesis first, Exodus, then Leviticus. Like, these weren't published this way like a Harry Potter book. That's not how Exodus isn't Genesis part 2. That's not how this works. These things come and go, and they're put together based on some of the narratives that they're attempting to describe to get some kind of historical narrative out of it, and also to arrange it to be complete with presenting things like the law and other important theological concepts. But that's an emphasis that Judaism placed on the Hebrew Bible. And Christians came along and essentially they kind of agreed with that when it comes to the first 5 books. But when it comes to the entire thing, alterations could be made. I don't get the impression that Darth understands that the books of the Old Testament were not written / published in order. I very much get the idea that he's one of these guys, and he's expressed this before, but he seems to be, well, I read the book of Genesis, which was the oldest book, and that was written first, all the way to the end where Revelation is, and that must be the most recent book written going. Now, I think it actually is the case that Revelation is probably the most written thing, next to maybe some of the letters of John that they found. But if chronology matters to Darth, he needs to explain to us why the 4 Gospels are arranged Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, when it was Mark, Matthew, Luke, John. And it was actually Mark, Matthew, Luke, Acts, John. So why is Acts coming after? Also, why are the Pauline epistles based after you read the Gospels instead of before? So you have to wonder, like, what chronology is important to Darth? The chronology of when they were written, or the chronology of what he thinks is important to the narrative? Because the way the New Testament is assembled, the emphasis is placed on the chronology of the narrative, which is dangerous, because that's why so many Christians are unaware that Paul never had access to the majority of the Gospels written. Probably did not even have access to the earliest Gospel written, which was Mark. because they read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and just assume those came first. And then Paul's out doing his thing. And so, of course, he read the manual. That'd be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And maybe, and then Acts is a little bit about him. So he's not in that part. And then there's his letters that follow. And some of that might be contemporaneous. This is the kind of thinking, the kind of historical blunders and lies that are frequently transmitted to Christians all the time that leave them incredibly confused and hopelessly ignorant about the books in this Bible that they're supposed to respect. And the reason why they end up like flipping out and getting skeptical when this news does come to them is because pastors, preachers, and apologists have been lying to people about what this shit means. And Darth is continuing in that shit tradition, just like he was raised in it. So, anyway, rant over.
According to whom?
It's chronological in the Bible. Do you
Chronological? How?
have you not even read the Bible?
But you understand that
just so I have a clear understanding. What are you?
I'm an atheist.
Okay, all right. So now I understand. Okay. What's the fifth book in the New Testament?
What's the what?
What's the fifth book in the New Testament?
Hold on. No, it's after Leviticus. What is it?
No, I said New Testament.
Oh, New Testament, the fifth book? Acts.
Okay. Yeah.
Love it when okay. Hogtie. I laughed out loud when I heard Dee Dee claim that the Bible, quote, is in chronological order. That's G-Man caliber dumb. Yes. Yeah. Deaton says they basically teach you at church that the Gospels are a single coherent narrative of 4 independent books that all confirm the same narrative. It's hilarious how dishonest that is. Yeah. And it's interesting, too, depending on who you talk to, how controversial it can be when they're like, well, shouldn't it be Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, given that those are kind of the dates where they were written? And some people get, oh, no, well, no. When you ask them, okay, do you acknowledge that there's a difference between the ages of Mark and Matthew? Mark is actually older. Sure. Okay. So why are they arranged? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And most of them will give you some pap about, well, thematically, like, aha. Thematically. So it's arranged chronologically, sometimes, based on what the narrative seems to hold. It's arranged thematically, sometimes, when that emphasis needs to be placed up front. And it might be arranged chronologically in terms of narrative, or chronologically in terms of like when they were written, so that we get a sense that, okay, this book is older than this one. Like, and I don't know how often that actually happens. I really couldn't tell you how often it happens, especially with like the first 5 books of the Old Testament, because as far as I know, there's bits and pieces of them that were cobbled together when they were edited and assembled. I don't think there's any way to know. That is a really confusing, very in-depth aspect of biblical scholarship that lay people don't really need to get into. You just need to know that those books, somebody didn't sit down and hammer out Genesis like they were cranking out. Like, it's not James Patterson cranking out a novel here. There were a lot of different things that they were pulling together and editing together to create that book. And so chronology, quote unquote, based on the stories being told and based on what was written when, are not going to always line up. They were lined up by scholars for their readers. And there's a reason they did that. So when Darth comes out and says, well, it was just chronological, it was just, yeah, in what sense and by whom? The lack of critical thinking on display from Darth Dawkins in this video during this conversation was so, I don't know, maybe he was like, had low blood sugar, he hadn't had his Popeye's chicken or something. This is just weird to me. He's just not there.
Why did it take you so long?
Well, because I was thinking about the 5th book of the Torah, and
I love this. Like, you get the answer right, and then he has to ask, why did it take so long? When it's pretty obvious that if he's like, well, which one is it, Leviticus or Deuteronomy? It's pretty obvious that the reason that it took him longer was because he clearly thought you were asking about the 5th book in the Old Testament. But he has to ask him this because he thinks he must be like, I don't know, was he trying to just signal to the audience, like, I think Mathematician's up to something?
Wondering if it was Deuteronomy or Leviticus. I always mix those two up.
The bottom line is, if you have a basic familiarity.
Wait, why did you ask that? Why did you ask that question?
It's a
Please don't
question
overtalk.
I ask that question all the time when people feign or pretend that they have a more generalized knowledge of the Bible than they do.
You think by knowing the fifth book of the New Testament, that determines whether or not I can understand the Bible?
No, that's not. Wow, you are really obtuse.
No, I think he got this right. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to say, like Darth does the trivia question. Well, if you can get that trivia right, then you have like somebody knowing that Acts is the fifth book of the New Testament is not going to help you get to the bottom of whether or not they have. This wouldn't help Darth Dawkins in a conversation with another Christian if he was trying to get to an understanding, if he felt the Christian had a comprehensive understanding of Christian theology based on their understanding of New Testament books. Asking them about, which book comes fifth? Acts. Okay. So now let's talk about and the guy's like, yeah, Hebrews wasn't written by Paul. And one of Darth's eyes like bursts, like confetti style, just, that level of aneurysm. And then he's got to like, how could you know that Acts is the fifth book of the Bible, but you think that there's fraudulent books in the New Testament? Like, yeah.
Okay. Wow.
I'm trying to understand your question.
I just explained my reasoning to you, and then you came back with something that you couldn't possibly have inferred. Okay. Now the point is this, right? The Quran.
Darth can't afford Popeyes. If he could, he'd actually have a more positive outlook on life. That's possible. I feel like Darth is a White Castle kind of guy. To be fair, I know that he's into Popeyes because I heard a video and he was eating Popeyes while he's on the mic. But I think he also is a White Castle guy. But I think that goes back a while. He also loves egg salad, I think, because he likes to put a lot of black pepper on it, and he loves his Taylor ham.
Ahmed thought he was continuing with the same thematic presentation of God, but it was just a figment of his imagination. Okay? You can clearly see this by studying the teachings of Islam. There's no plan of salvation. Okay? There is a plan of salvation in the Bible. There is none in Islam. Did you know that?
So are we like shifting the topic from chronology to this other thing?
No, I'm not shifting the chronology. I'm going back to my original point that Islam is a basic historical bastardization of Christianity by a guy. Please don't interrupt me.
It's not. If anything, it gets kind of into the concepts of what he thinks the Christians are talking about, and in that he believes that the Christians have made a fundamental mistake with what they believe their revelation is, and thinking that Jesus is a God. That's about it, other than to get into some of the other stuff. Whoa! Thanks for the super chat. But where did this happen? I'm excited for you to go over Darth telling someone to unalive themselves, and it's got the K word in there. Thanks for the super chat again. I don't know, when did he do that? Is that a new one? Oh, is that the TOS violation one? I haven't watched that one yet. If that's the one you're talking about.
Okay. Now, because you don't believe it, that's why you object to it. But the fact is, anybody who's familiar with the basic historical progression of Islam and its doctrinal tenets, and we compare that to the historical progression from.
Okay, Jordangus and Christy Hammer saying Time Rabbit. Was this recent? I'm kind of interested. Yeah, because if it's in that new one, I'll probably be covering that one in another day or two.
Genesis to the New Testament and the doctrinal development, it's clear that he took things that he liked and he just simply ignored or rejected the things that he did like.
Let's say that that's what happened. Thank you, Michael Deaton, Tom's newest video. Okay. All right. That's got to. All right. I wondered what the terms of service violation is. Yeah, that'll get you in trouble. Yep. Yes, most recent. Okay. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check that one out. Because I haven't watched the full hour, and I might not watch the full hour of the him with the biologist guy. That one I might save for this weekend sometime to kind of go through that one, because that one's about an hour long. So I might hit that TOS one up. before I get to that, back to that one.
Were you even aware that he completely botched the accurate representation of the Trinity before he condemned it?
So he's going back to this with the Trinity. The weird thing is the claim that he's like, well, this guy just decided to cobble together his own religion from things that he liked about Christianity, and then just got rid of stuff that he didn't like. I don't know that much about the history of Islam, but trying to say that Islam now was formulated simply because Muhammad just did that is pretty stupid. Because what the religion is now, first of all, it's not a univocal religion anymore. It has different sects. It has different variations in it. Obviously, you've got like the Shia and Sunni kind of sects, but you have other differences too between people who tend to be a little bit more liberal or progressive in it, and people who tend to be a lot more literal or a lot more conservative, socially or otherwise, or more dogmatic. And even the dogmas kind of change. So yeah, it's a much more complicated and a much more sophisticated faith tradition than Darth seems to be getting here. He just like this one warlord in the Arabian Peninsula just read a little bit about Judaism. He probably looked it up on Wikipedia, right, Darth? And then he looked up a little bit of Christianity on Wikipedia. And then he's just like, I like this part and this part. That Trinity thing seems confusing. Scratch that. And then poof, I'll call it Islam. And it will be, and I'll call my God Allah. I mean, if Darth is trying to like audition to be like a creator for kids' educational series on like, hey, Christian kids, this is what you should know about Islam and how you can convert your little Islamic friends to Christianity. First of all, tell them a bunch of nonsense about their religion that isn't true and that their parents can refute in seconds. And hopefully that after that completely alienates you from them, they'll never trust another Christian again. Good for you. Way to continue to divide those faith traditions forever.
Did you know that?
Yeah, I heard his interpretation.
No. Did you know it before you heard me discuss it?
Did I know what exactly?
Did you know before I discussed it that he botched the historical representation of the doctrine of the Trinity?
No.
No, you didn't. So
that's because he didn't. This is going to be the Mary thing.
See, this is one among several key points that is definitive evidence that Muhammad was just bastardizing Christianity as.
That wouldn't be the bastardization of Christianity in order to create Islam. It would be an incorrect criticism of of another religion, and it isn't.
He understood it. Did you? You know? Okay. What did Muhammad teach about the crucifixion of Jesus?
I think he taught that it happened.
Okay, stop right there. We're done. You are completely ignorant. Okay, you don't know what. You don't have the foggiest idea of what you're talking about. Muhammad was very clear, and it's recorded in the Quran, the view on the crucifixion. And in fact, it's the exact opposite of what you just said. It's the exact opposite of what you just said.
It's the exact opposite of what Mathematician just said. Let me see here. Because I'm really wondering what he's kind of getting, where he's actually trying to go with this. So I believe the tradition is they believe that someone was made to resemble him, was killed in his place, and that's why his ministry was able to go on after the fact. So a crucifixion occurred, but it wasn't of Jesus, the actual Jesus. It was somebody that looked like him in order to kind of like stage the whole thing, appease the Romans, and then Jesus went on doing his thing.
Have you read the Quran?
Okay, I've read through portions of it. Okay,
Have you
I
read the
read.
whole thing?
Okay, no, but
What's the fifth book
listen,
of the what's the fifth book of
okay, you're gonna play. You're gonna play this little game.
Can you answer with the
What would be wrong with playing that little game? This is the game that Darth Dawkins started. If it's fair to ask somebody if they know what the fifth book of the New Testament is, it's perfectly fair to ask somebody, hey, do you know what the fifth surah of the Quran is?
fifth book of
No,
the Quran?
no, I can't.
So why
But I
not?
have because I have
What does
enough.
that say?
Okay,
Then
no,
what
no,
does
no,
that say
sir,
about your standard?
sir. Because the Quran is not chronological. I don't care to memorize the titles of the book because I already know.
So it's only worth memorizing the titles of the books if they're chronological. How would you know that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are written in chronological order based on the names ascribed to those four gospels? What the hell is he talking about? This is some basic bitch just failure on his part. Holy shit. Oh, well, they're not arranged chronologically, so why would I, I'm not going to bother. Like, you're not memorizing the books of the Bible in a chronological pattern either. Wow.
From the get-go that it's a bastardization. I'm familiar with the basic tenets of Islam. Now, what you're doing now is if you ever talk to me again, you're going to get server name.
He's getting quite worked up now. This is getting good.
All right, I won't overtime.
Now, the fact of the matter is, you made a major blunder there. Okay, you said that Muhammad accepted the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. That's right. Okay, that's the exact opposite. And in fact,
it's not the exact opposite. The exact opposite would be there was no crucifixion of Christ. The actual take, according to the Quran, is a crucifixion happened, and it appeared to be Jesus, but that guy was a stand-in. The real Jesus went on to live longer.
Do you know what
that's not the exact opposite of being crucified?
The Quran says about the crucifixion?
Honestly, no. I haven't read it. Have you?
Okay, yeah, I have read that. Okay, it says that it was made. Jesus did not die on the cross. It was made to appear that he died on the cross, but he did not die. Okay, so what we have here is another historical example of the bastardization of the historical crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Okay.
The historical no, they don't dispute the historical crucifixion of Christ. They believe that a crucifixion occurred. I don't know what he means, but what he thinks they mean by like appearing to be. This isn't some magic thing. They think that somebody resembling Christ was executed in Christ's place, and then Christ continued to do his ministry or whatever a little bit longer afterward. He wasn't miraculously resurrected from the dead. See, Darth is going to have a problem with this because that's a central thing that Islam is going to reject. They're not going to accept the claim that Christ died and came back to life and is God. Those are things that just be like, no.
Can you show me where it says that? I'm actually curious. I didn't know
that. I can't recall the actual surah and verse off the top of my head.
Oh,
All you have Surah 157. 157.
Matt's like jumping in there. It's right here. It's right here. This is where they get it wrong.
In the chat, please.
Now, see, I don't think that you're an honest player. I don't think you really understand enough about Christianity that you think you do, nor do you show understanding about the nature of Islam. But you told me you're an atheist. Can you tell me what the rational basis for your atheism is?
Yeah, you listening to you talk about any other religion. I mean, seriously, the claims that Darth has made to reject Islam are not the kinds of claims that he would accept from somebody rejecting Christianity. He's just going to say Islam is a bastardization of Christianity concocted by a warlord in the Arabian Peninsula. Fine. Christianity is a bastardization of Judaism concocted by a bunch of apocalyptic paranoiacs who lived in the first century Levant and were terrified of Rome and wanted political upheaval above all. There. Sufficiently dismissive? Great. So there's no reason for me to take the claims of Christians seriously, or in any of the offshoots of what they tried to do in terms of like either altering Judaism or creating a standalone faith in Christianity. It's over. It's done. Would Darth respect that? No. So I love this. What's your grounding for being an atheist? For the same reason that you rejected Islam, I reject Christianity. So that's just done and done. We're on the same playing field. Also, I reject Judaism because it makes claims about history and a supernatural being and its relationship to a group of people throughout history that simply do not sound true. They can't be established. They defy rational thought. They defy the physics of the world. They defy natural law and any the suspension of the sun, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's no reason to believe these claims literally. And without having been raised in the faith tradition, there's very little reason for me to hold to them emotionally because I didn't really receive any kind of comfort or support or anything else being a part of this tradition. There's no community for me. So that's why I would reject Judaism. I reject Christianity because it seems like a bastardization of Judaism. And I would reject Islam, not because I think Islam is a bastardization of Christianity, but because I think Islam is attempting to do similar things like Christianity is doing and establish itself as the new, most recent, most reliable, extra special, 100% accurate, Revelation 2.0. Generally, when something comes along and presents itself that way, you can tell that thing to go fuck off.
On the rational basis?
Yeah.
What do you mean by rational basis?
Is your atheism rational?
I'm asking you, what do you mean by rational?
Look, I'm not playing these little games.
I can't answer your question unless
you
I
know
know
what?
what
You
you
know
mean.
what? You know what? You know what? You're about to get server muted. Okay.
Ooh,
Now, what you're doing is the little obstructionist game that you little boys do on the internet all the time. And as a 62-year-old man, I no longer have
He's 62. Happy birthday, Darth. Darth's 62, everybody. He just admitted to it. Yay. Where's the cake and ice cream?
patience for this kind of crap. I know Matt Slick has vastly more patience than I do, but I don't. Okay. Now, either you're going to respond to me like an adult, where we can respectfully disagree, or you're going to play these little games and you're going to get server muted. Now, what do you mean? What do you mean by rational? Okay. Now,
it's a fair question.
Atheism is the position.
I love it when you have to actually do this with these ding-dongs. You can be rational and be wrong. I don't understand why you have to explain. Well, I do understand why you have to explain it. Being rational does not mean right. Like, is it rational for you to think that there is no God? Yes. What's your rationale? And then I can get into arguments that I don't agree with. So there's rhetorical or reasonable reasons why, something based on argument or pure logic. Empirical evidence. I haven't seen a demonstration of anything that would come close to convincing me that a God of that scope or size or whatever would exist. So there's an empirical rationale for it. And like, well, could you be wrong about it? Sure, of course. Just because it's rational doesn't mean it's correct. But it is based on a rationale. It can just be as simple as, do you believe in Jesus? Nah, never met him. That's a rational reason. And actually kind of a devastating one if you're talking to somebody like Darth Dawkins, who believes that being personal, a personal deity, is necessary for that entity. If you say, no, haven't met him, that should really be kind of a gut punch for them. But they'll go on to be like, well, that's not a good reason. Well, I thought the God that you believe in is necessarily a personal being. So I think it is. He hasn't revealed himself to me personally. I don't know him. And if you try to say, well, why isn't general revelation good enough? I would ask you, well, if it's general revelation is good enough for the rest of you Christians, what the hell do you need a Bible for?
That there are no gods, and specifically that there is not a creator. Okay? That's the standard definition of atheism. Now, you either use the standard definition of atheism or you do not. Do you use the standard definition of atheism?
Not that one, no, but I'll agree. I'll work with it if you want.
Okay. No. I don't want you to work with it. So now I'm going to show you.
It's not a. This is the problem. It's a polysemous term. It has more than one meaning. The idea of being like, well, if you're going to have a discussion, you're going to have to work with a single definition for the purposes of this kind of discussion. Otherwise, you're going to be jumping around from somebody's philosophical position, their position on either rational arguments, their position as far as to the propositions engaged in citing whether a God or God does exist, can exist, whatever, and then getting into just the basic psychological position of an atheist. Do you think God's real? Nope. I'm not inclined to be convinced of that. Why? I couldn't. I'm just not convinced that it's real. Based on the things that I've seen, I'm more inclined to think that there is no God rather than that there is one. Now, if I see more things, hear more things, it could be that my brain starts going in a different direction and I start changing my mind. But as of right now, it isn't. Like, oh, okay. Well, would you say that that is a claim that there is no God, or is that a claim that you lack belief? In a way, it's sort of both. From a psychological perspective, it's just you're not convinced it's real. And you'll notice that Darth Dawkins desperately wants to stay away from having a conversation with somebody who approaches atheism in that way, because if you did approach atheism and belief in that way, then you have to really deal with the fact that that atheist's heart has not been changed. And so Darth is essentially trying to jumpstart or get ahead of actual revelation or actual grace, depending on how you kind of get into it. If he's sort of leaning into the Calvinist thing, then what he's trying to do is short circuit that attempt. I'm going to get you to rationally conclude that there must be a God, and then my work is done. If that's necessary, then what is the point of the Holy Spirit? What is the point of grace? And what is the point of the transformation of the human heart? I don't expect Darth to understand those things, because and this is great. He's not just getting Islam wrong. He's getting a lot of parts of Christianity. Really, he's doing Christianity badly.
How you're even naive that even other atheists recognize that your position is untenable. Okay, is there a single word in the entire English language which designates or denotes one who denies the existence of God?
Like an agnostic atheist?
Now, is there a single word in the English language that denotes or designates one who denies the existence of God?
I'd say an atheist, yeah.
Right. So you're calling yourself an atheist. You're giving yourself the only word, you're labeling yourself with the only word in the English language which designates the denial of God, but you're not denying God. So are you?
Yeah, this is torturous. You don't have to deny God as a concept in order to claim that you don't believe in him actually. But that's a longer conversation. I don't need to run down that tangent. But Brian Stevens, one time I went out for pizza with Darth Dawkins. He told me I wasn't justified in eating the pizza because I didn't know what was absolute and ultimate that allowed the pizza to exist. Yeah, spit that illusionary pepperoni out your mouth. Oh, Darth.
Is it your position that you are suspending belief in either the existence or non-existence of God?
I do not believe in the existence of God.
That's not an answer to my question. Shall I repeat the question again? Because
I love it when he has to do this. He has to exhaust the Steve McRae semantic thing.
I'm very well accustomed to people being obfuscating and dodging.
Obfuscating and dodging, when you could actually try to explain what you mean by atheism a little bit better. The reason that he won't, Darth is the guy that needs atheism to be defined in one single way, because that allows him to do all of his karate. That gives him the ability to pull every one of his karate moves on it. Like if I tie both arms behind its back, drop it to its knees, now I can do all of my karate techniques will work. I'll be able to devastate this attacker who's coming at me for some reason, advancing on me on their knees with their hands tied behind their back, and maybe a ball gag on their mouth, just to make sure that they don't have teeth to be dangerous too. Instead of being able to be like, look, what version of atheism are we going to be talking about here? Are we talking about psychological state? You're not convinced that God exists, just generally speaking, or Is it a more philosophical position where you think that arguments that support the idea that there is no God or God's not possible are true? He could just do that and probably get through this whole thing a lot faster. But instead, he agonizes over the definition of agnostic and atheist and all these positions because he desperately needs to hamstring his opponent so that he can then he can make it a decision, make it a conversation. Okay, here's the thing. I am going to assert God in a way that makes God, I'm just going to insist that it's a necessarily existent being, and it has to be the case that it exists. Now, you, ding dong, are the atheist, and the atheist is somebody who doesn't believe that thing, who believes that thing doesn't exist. You need to prove it can't. Which, if Darth was actually honest with himself, he'd know that that was fucking stupid, because if he's postulating an argument that the God that he's talking about is necessarily existing, then I couldn't make the claim that it can't exist, because it has to. It has to exist. It's a necessarily existing being. The interesting thing about that is that if Darth's going to go down that way, he needs to be able to demonstrate it, because he's claiming that it's necessarily existent. And he won't do that, because he can't do that. He's going to then retreat back into just pure rhetoric. Oh, well, here, how about the ontological argument? How about a little bit of transcendent stuff? How about some precept over here? It's all bullshit and tap dancing. None of this works. And really, he should be a lot more angry about this whole thing, with this conversation, because, I mean, holy shit, did he screw up so many times those first 10 minutes?
Is it your position that you neither affirm nor deny the existence of God, and that it could be summed up in saying that you suspend judgment about the existence or non-existence of God?
Suspending judgment. Yeah, the last thing you should do is suspend judgment. Darth comes at you with a Dunkin' Donuts latte that has been created incorrect. Just ask Susie about this. That's what it was. Justice for Susie. I couldn't remember which name it was.
Oh, that's fair. I think that's pretty fair.
Okay, well, that's the definition of agnosticism, not atheism.
Well, I'm willing to say that I believe in like fallibilism, for example.
No. We're not playing this little game, sir, where you rabbit trail. Okay. The fact of the matter is,
how was that rabbit trailing?
You're claiming to be an atheist, which is the only word in the English language designated and defined in the reference literature, encyclopedias, dictionaries, and including philosophical dictionaries, encyclopedias. The only word that's designated to identify somebody who denies the existence of God, you use that label.
No, that's not right. First of all, those books would lay out what the meaning of atheism is, but it's interesting when Darth says they designate. Those books do not make that word mean that thing. Those books catalog words that mean those things, because that's the way people tend to use them. But people also use agnostic to refer to, generally speaking, to non-believers. So Darth's just wrong here too.
For yourself, but now you're saying that you don't deny God. Now, here's the problem. Are you now claiming to be an agnostic?
Well, I'm an agnostic atheist.
No, sir. That's internet claptrap, and I'll tell you why. Okay.
Oh God.
Okay? Does atheism represent, as far as you're concerned, an absence of a positive belief in God?
Not necessarily. No.
Okay. When you call yourself an agnostic atheist, the word atheist, when you use it, does that refer to the denial of the existence of God?
More like the denial of the existence of your God in particular.
No. That's not atheism, sir. Stop. You know what? I'm really getting pissed right now with your dishonesty here.
I don't understand why Darth has lost this. I like Rick and Ader's question. God has to exist in order to deny him, right? Yeah. But as far as Darth's concerned, like it's in country. I mean, everyone knows that he exists. There are people that acknowledge the existence of God. There are those that deny the existence of God, which is why it's necessary for him to be like, atheist. That's the word that we have passed down to us by Webster's dictionary, granted to us by the Wikipedia and such, that allows us to use the word atheism to refer to people that deny the existence of God. That's a theological claim he's making. That is not what atheism means. Atheism has more than one meaning. And if he read those entries, he would fucking know better. And he should know better. Atheism can refer to somebody who is an agnostic atheist. It can refer to somebody who's in a position of just psychological atheism. They're just not convinced that gods are real, and they don't care to know one way or the other. Or it can refer to the philosophical position, or there's a proposition, a God exists or God does not exist, and they're like, no, gods don't exist. It could refer to the position of a person. They could describe the position of a person who goes so far as to say that not only do they not believe, they're not convinced that a God is real, and they're not convinced that it's possible, but they have arguments to make that indicate that God is in fact impossible. So it's not that they deny the existence of God, they deny the possibility of the existence of a God, which is actually probably a lot more hard, would be harder for Darth to talk to people with. It would be harder for him to have that discussion. But this nonsense about, well, that's what it means. It's the people that deny it. That's him smuggling in Romans 1 and some misunderstood Pauline bullshit into this equation to say, no, there are only two types of people in the world: those that acknowledge the existence of God and those that would deny his existence. That's it. That's all you get. False dichotomy. That is not, in fact, all you have. And if it were, we wouldn't have the variety of meanings for the word atheist that we do, and atheism, if that were the case. We wouldn't. This would be he wouldn't have to go through this mental twister game to do this.
Okay. We're not talking about my God right now. What we're talking about is your atheism. This is the classic bait and switch that you atheists do all the time. Okay. And I'm wise to it. Okay. I've been doing this for 13 years.
But he's projecting again because he's dealt with lots of atheists. That must mean that Mathematician, who's identified as an atheist, even though Darth doesn't seem to be able to pin him down to a definition that he tolerates, must be doing the same thing. Fascinating.
Yeah.
It's interesting that his mind goes there. It could just be no one understands what the hell he's talking about. But no, what is actually going on is they all understand that Darth's definition of atheism is univocal and correct, and we all know it. But we play these games with him to drive him nuts.
The fact of the matter is this: you called yourself an agnostic atheist. Does the word atheist mean a simply an absence of a positive belief, or does, when you call yourself an agnostic atheist, does the word atheist mean there's no God?
Atheism means there's no God.
Okay, but you see, you just told me a minute ago that that's not how you're using the term.
He also described himself as an agnostic atheist, you Nimrod, and you rejected him calling himself an agnostic atheist. Now you're asking him, hey, do you agree with this definition of atheism? He's basically saying that he does. That isn't how he described himself before. Fuck, Darth can't keep track of this, and he was just talking about this. I think he's been on this jog for about 3 minutes, and he's already lost track of where he was.
That's right.
Okay, so when you call yourself an agnostic atheist, when you use the word atheist, it doesn't mean there's no God or creator. So does the atheist, when you use it in that compound term, does atheist mean that there's an absence of a positive belief in God?
I can define agnostic atheist very easily.
Be quiet.
I'd kind of like to hear what Duck's definition of agnostic atheist is. We are not talking about my God now. Complaining about baiting and switching by baiting and switching? Exactly. And what's interesting here, Cocos, is that when he's done this before, he has acknowledged that you can be it seems like he's dropped the idea of trying to make a distinction between global atheists and local atheists, which he's admitted that he is. Because there's gods that he does not believe in, that other people are genuinely convinced. Well, I guess that's the thing. In terms of his theology, they're just incorrect. Right? I think most of us would be like, there are people out there in faith traditions that are convinced that no, it's Yahweh, no, it's Allah, no, it's Vishnu, no, it's something else, it's Amaterasu, whatever. But Darth's like, no, I don't care about that. He doesn't believe in those gods, so that would make him an atheist, at least a local one. But he doesn't seem to now want to go down that. He used to do that. Now he seems to have abandoned that.
You're going to get server muted. I'm talking to Mathematician. And by the way, I'm not asking these questions because I want to be educated. Okay? It's to prove a point here. Now,
Well, so I'm
When you use the word agnostic atheist, does the word atheist mean the denial of God or an absence of a positive belief in
the denial of God.
God? Okay, so now you're flip flopping. Okay, so you
Jesus, he just gave you what you wanted, and now you're accusing him of flip-flopping. He originally defined himself as an agnostic atheist. You're asking about a definition of atheism, and he's giving the definition that's closest to what you want. And this is sad. Holy shit. Darth Dawkins, if you are listening to this, fucking quit the internet. Delete your accounts. Stop engaging online. You are too fucking stupid to be doing this stuff. Knock it off. Everything that he's talked about in this conversation has made every topic worse. He's like, he shed no light on Islam or helping people to understand what that religion is like. He's actually made Christianity appear stupider because of the way he's described the way how he thinks Muslims get Christian doctrine wrong, which he couldn't get that correct either. And now getting into this usual mashup of how do we define agnostic versus atheist, blah, 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 blah with Mathematician, instead of going with a distinction, going with a definition that where he can kind of meet this guy in the middle. He's so desperate to paint Mathematician as a bad actor that now he's going to refer back to it like, oh, aha, but you flip-flopped it because that's not what you said before. Of course it's not, Darth. What he said before, you wouldn't allow. When he said agnostic atheist, you rejected it and then began to badger him about this definition further. Holy fucking shit. Like, take the fucking win, Darth. He can't. What a fucking loser.
you do.
Kind of,
So
yeah.
okay, so you do deny God's existence.
Many gods' existence, actually. Yeah.
No, I didn't. No, I didn't say many gods.
Why not? Why didn't he say many gods?
Do you deny the existence of God?
Which one? And this is important because if it starts God, yeah.
Yes. Do you deny the
Okay.
existence of Allah as a Muslim God?
Okay. Well, but you see, the word God is generic for the Creator. As
Right.
to what
We're talking past each other.
Listen to me. Listen to me. You think I don't know what you're doing right now? You think I'm not an experienced debater with atheists? I know precisely what.
It's not, one, you're not a debater. Two, you have experience yammering at people online. That's fine. Darth Dawkins has lots of experience about being wrong on the internet. That's just what he does. This is interesting. Like, you don't think that I'm an experienced debater. You don't understand. You don't think that I don't know what you're doing. And I really don't think Darth Dawkins understands what Mathematician is saying. He doesn't understand what he's talking about. These topics are too hard for Darth. They may have been within his grasp 10, 13 years ago. They're not anymore.
What you're doing right now. So your position then is you are an atheist according to the standard definition that there are no gods, and specifically that there is not a creator God. Is that your position?
If you're using these standard definitions, I'm an
You
agnostic.
know what? You better start being a straight shooter. I'm telling you, you're going to get surveyed. Now,
I told you.
your
I'm
position
agnostic.
is he?
Yeah, the only one not being a straight shooter in this conversation is Darth Dawkins. Mathematician is correct. He said, I gave a standard definition of what I am and be an agnostic. Darth really doesn't understand how devastating this is because anybody that actually is an agnostic, this is something that bugs me too because this comes up a lot. Back in the day when Steve McRae, the kind of like I think it was post Pal Talk, but it was the Google Plus, the great debate community. These guys would get into these debates all the time. Steve McRae, Ozymandias, Nate the lawyer was actually in that group, and they would go back and forth on this. And one of the key distinctions about this is this idea that if you're going to have the philosophical debate, you probably have to settle in to the position, one or the other, that you affirm the existence of God, quote unquote, or you deny the existence of that God. One exists, it exists, or it does not exist. And that keeps it binary enough so that you can have something of a productive conversation in a philosophical sense. Sides can present arguments, counter arguments, refutations, etc. That works. But if you're asking somebody about what they genuinely believe, and Darth Dawkins will get emotionally worked up, quite invested, asking somebody, I want to know what you think. I want to know what you feel is the correct answer. And that could be, I don't know that there is a God. I'm inclined to think that there isn't one, but maybe there is. And he will lose his mind. Like, no, that's not how it works, because Darth doesn't understand that taking the position in a philosophical sense is not necessarily taking the same position in an emotional investment sense, in a psychological sense. I could take either side on the affirming the existence of God or denying the existence of God in a philosophical debate. But all arguments for God may be false and God could still be true, and vice versa. So that doesn't really get us anywhere other than to engage in philosophical rhetoric. And that might be edifying and it might be, healthy. But if you're asking me what I actually think, what I actually believe, I could be. Now, in my case, I think that God, the God that most apologists tend to assert, isn't possible, because what they're asserting is an ultimate being with a shitload of catastrophic properties that simply can't exist in one thing. It's essentially, it's to me, it's just nonsense. So my inclination is that God, at least as described, not only doesn't exist, but can't. But that puts me in a strong position. And that's only based on them debating that particular kind of God. If somebody comes around and says, well, wait a minute, what about a God that's basically just a super being? What if the gods of the Mount Olympus were like highly evolved beings and we thought they were gods? Well, if that starts to become the definition of what a God is, then we have to change things, and whether I believe in it or not might change too. But in terms of talking to somebody like Darth Dawkins, if he's asking me whether it's philosophically or emotionally, do I think that God is real? The answer is no. But for many people that he gets into contact with, they're going to be more like Mathematician. They're going to say, I'm not convinced that there is a God. That being said, I'm not convinced that a God is impossible. And so, as to his possibility, I remain agnostic. As to whether or not he's actual, I tend to lead towards the fact that he's not. And I think that's actually not a bad position for an agnostic to be in. And I don't know if anybody would raise issues with the idea of drawing the distinction between thinking God is actual and thinking the possibility of God is maybe a little bit more withholding judgment on that. And I think that's what people do. Maybe there is a God out there. Maybe a God is responsible for all this. But I'm not inclined to think that that's so. And Darth can't do that because you can't engage in the kind of abusive rhetorical nonsense that Darth wants to whip out at people, and just deal with that. Because what's he going to do? What's he going to say? According to his concept of theology, he has to wait for those people to be convicted in their hearts and converted by the Holy Spirit. That's no fun. He needs victims to abuse now in the name of Jesus, and he's going to take steps. And that's what he's doing here.
Your position that God does not exist.
Using your definition, I'm an agnostic.
Okay. So you do not deny the existence of God.
In that sense, yes. That's
okay.
correct.
Now here's the problem. So you're claiming you're suspending judgment about God being the creator. Is that correct?
Arbitrary. Yes, I'll just say yes.
Yeah. These are not trick questions.
Well, they kind of are.
No, they're not. If I say to you, are you suspending judgment about the Loch Ness Monster? That's not a trick question. If I say, are you suspending judgment about the God? That's not a trick question. Why are you talking while I'm talking? Okay.
Somebody needs to save Darth Dawkins from himself at this point. So
it's not a trick question. So stop lying. You know it's not a trick question. I know it's not a trick question. Everybody in the room knows it's not a trick question. Okay. But people like atheists like you like to lie. Okay. Now, here's the problem. Okay. There's only two possible worlds. There's the God world and the not God world, as per the law of excluded middle. Are you familiar with the law of excluded middle, being a mathematician?
Say that again. You can.
Are you familiar with the law of excluded middle?
This is good.
No, I'm not. Like Slavic. I don't. Maybe use a different name.
Yeah. Okay. How old are you?
I'm 29.
Okay. And why do you call yourself a mathematician?
Because I went to grad school.
Oh, okay. Did you take any logic courses?
Yeah, I took plenty of logic courses.
Okay. Do you know what the laws of logic are?
For the most part, yes.
Okay. What's the law of excluded middle?
I don't know that exact name. Is there a different name for that
Okay,
same
you know
law?
what the law of identity is?
Which one?
You know what the law of identity is in the basic three laws of logic?
The basic three laws of logic that he's talking about are just classic, the three laws that come out of classical logic. And it is always possible if you're asking a mathematician that he's not going to know or not remember exactly what they are, because he probably doesn't really have to deal with them all that much, because they're not always going to be worthwhile, depending on the kind of mathematics he's into. Not going to always be relevant to what he's doing or studying.
Do I know what the identity
So
is?
the answer is no.
No. In this context, no, I don't.
Yeah, the law of identity is something is what.
Lucky Seven Wolf, this is a false dichotomy at time. God world / not God world. Yeah, I mean, this is always the thing. There's either a world with God in it, the not God world, never really. It's like it's one or the other. No, it's not. You could have a world with one God, or no gods, or multiple gods, or 5 gods only. There's all sorts of different things. Like, this isn't really a dichotomy. Like, no, it is the case that either a God exists or a God doesn't exist. Okay, that's fine. But a not God world versus a God world doesn't really make sense when you could have multiple gods in it. Like, that extra component doesn't exist. The law of excludability, like, this God, ultimate being, exists or it does not. Okay, fine. There you go. But not God world and God world, that's weak.
What it is. A equals A. The law of non-contradiction. A cannot equal not A. Okay.
Oh, you're talking. Okay. Yeah, I know that one.
Here's the law of excluded middle. Something is either A or not A. Now,
Oh, that's the law of non-contradiction.
when we apply the law of excluded middle to worldviews, okay, either we are in the God world or not.
Yeah, exactly, Hogtie. Hogtie writes, this shows how little Darth knows about logic. He believes that his poor understanding of basic classical ancient Greek logic is comprehensible. It's not. There's more.
Okay, it's a true dichotomy. There's no third alternative. Okay, good. Therefore,
so I call that the
when facts are invoked, they will either be invoked with reference to the necessity of God or without. Okay?
Okay.
Now, that statement is necessarily true as per the law of excluded middle.
No, it's not.
Okay? Now,
how would that be necessarily true based on the law of excluded middle? What that doesn't make sense.
When you invoke facts, whatever they are, do you invoke them explicitly or implicitly with reference to the necessity of God?
Irrelevant.
Do you do that?
But it's absolutely irrelevant. What difference if this is the thing, the classic mistake. He's going right back to his version of precept. And this is the problem. Remember, precept is based on the assumption of the truth of God, or the truth of Christ, or the truth of Christianity. But it's the assumption of the truth of God or the Bible or whatever is the foundation for knowledge. You can't know it unless you assume the truth of the thing that undergirds it. This is different than trying to say that we can't know things or we can't have things because there isn't something there to have provided them. That'd be the evidentialist side of things. God is we rely on God to provide the reality that we everything derives and depends on this ultimate creator being. Therefore, we have the ability to know about the world around us because of the senses that thing granted us and because of the things that's put in place and the blah, 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 blah. But that's not where precept goes. Precept is, and this is what he's getting to. When you invoke facts, you do so implicitly or explicitly, referring to the mind of God. In other words, you need to assume the truth of the existence of God, as defined by Darth Dawkins, in order to make sense, in order to have a foundation for knowledge. He cannot demonstrate why that's necessary. And the interesting thing here is that he's saying, you would do so. Do you do that implicitly or explicitly? Well, here's the problem with that. I asked him about this, and this has been repeated many times. If there really is a God who is the foundation for all other things, reality derives and depends on it. When you invoke a fact or talk about any aspect of reality, including yourself, implicit within that discussion is the fact that everything that we're discussing derives and depends upon God. If that reality is true, it's implicit automatically. What he needs, I don't know why he's bringing up the implicit-explicit distinction, because what difference would it make if you made it explicit? That wouldn't change what those things are. And it wouldn't change whether you were correct about them or not. I know that that box is over there in the corner because God put it there. I invoke God explicitly when I invoke the fact that there's a box over there in the corner of the room. I don't just do it implicitly. I do it explicitly. That wouldn't change whether that person was right or wrong. This is completely irrelevant. Darth is blowing this up. And if he gets pushed, he's automatically going to go to the one defense that all Christians have when they go down this route. God is the source of all stuff upon which all things derive and depend, which is an evidentialist claim, not an epistemological one. So this question that he's asking Mathematician is irrelevant, wrong-headed, and a waste of time.
No.
Okay. So that means that you are invoking facts without referencing the necessity of God.
Explicitly or implicitly, Darth?
Oh, that's true. Yes.
Okay. Now, you know what modus ponens is?
Yes.
Oh,
I do.
no.
Okay. Via modus ponens, your position entails the denial of God, not directly but indirectly. Okay. You are
Okay.
invoking facts without reference to the necessity of God. That is equivalent to saying fact X, the tree blows in the wind.
Modus ponens does not make a thing true. Modus ponens makes a thing valid. I can't believe he's back to this again. We have to tell this old fart again that he's getting logic wrong. Modus ponens is prescriptive in the sense that it is telling people how to go about figuring something out, how to apply your thinking to a particular problem. And modus ponens being something that you can infer from, it's an inference rule. You can use that to construct a syllogism. And if it's consistently constructed, that grants it some validity. It makes it stronger. It does not grant it truth. Holy shit. I did not realize that Darth Dawkins was so wrong throughout this video that he even got this shit wrong again. Multiple people have had to talk to him about how, like before, it was telling him how he was getting modus ponens constructed incorrectly. He was confusing it, I think, with modus. Actually, he was doing a classic fallacy, a kind of formal fallacy with the construction of it, and multiple people had to tell him, no. And he finally got that, but he's still stuck on this. Aha, but with modus ponens, I could use modus ponens to show you that you're wrong. No, you can't. You could use modus ponens, you could use inference rules, or you can use the consistency that those rules are dependent upon to show that somebody was inconsistent in their reasoning and that their construction is invalid. That would not make them wrong. And Darth knows this because Darth has said, all the arguments for God may fail, but that doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. That means that you can lack validity in that all of these arguments could be shown to be invalid, but there could still be a truth about the things the arguments are arguing for. Because validity doesn't get you to truth, and Darth desperately needs that to be the case, to the point where now he's not even saying like, aha, we have modus ponens gives a consistent construction. I have a valid argument consistent with this inference rule, and therefore I have truth. That would be bad enough. Now he's gotten even lazier and just said, aha, modus ponens, I can get truth from that. Without constructing the argument. Maybe he does. We'll see.
With no God needed. Okay?
Right.
Without reference to the necessity of God. If you
Right.
add, if you have the additional clause with no
No, I have to disagree with April Knight. Thank you for the comment. That's hilarious. Take a shot at whenever Ding Dong says the person's name. As long as the shot is water, even taking shots of Kool-Aid at the rate that he refers to people would be deadly. Your liver would fail. Yeah, don't do that. Do not do that.
God needed. Okay? That's the denial of God. Okay? It's an indirect denial of God via modus ponens. If P, then Q. P, therefore Q. Okay? So you're making the classic
Yeah, I guess so,
statement. Yeah, so you're making the classic mistake that most unbelievers make, thinking that the only way to deny God's existence is to do it directly
I
rather
don't think
than
that's the only way.
okay, well,
I
but
don't think
you
that's the only way at all.
deny God indirectly by affirming propositions without reference to the necessity of God. Okay? If P, then Q. P, therefore Q. So what you do affirm entails that God cannot logically coexist in that world. Okay? And that constitutes the denial of God. Okay? So
That
you
is a
know,
denial of God, yes. It's not the only one.
right? Okay. So the point is this.
Yeah, but that still, even just because even if the argument was set up in a syllogism and it was set up using modus ponens and it was consistent, that would get you validity, would not get you truth. Good Lord, Darth Dawkins, reach out to your therapist.
You no longer have the luxury to claim that you're neutral or you're suspending about judgment about God. You've decided that facts don't necessitate referencing the necessity of God, and you invoke facts. Right.
Hey Pat, welcome to it's a real shit show on this one. Darth is in fine form.
So here's the deal. Your position is you do deny God. You just do it implicitly and indirectly.
Oh, that's what he means by that. Oh, okay. I'm trying to figure out why the hell that matters when you're invoking a fact. Like, oh, you're just doing it indirectly. Like, what difference would it fucking make? Every Christian that would invoke a fact, if they didn't say Jesus says, or Yahweh wills it, or whatever, would also be doing it implicitly if they're invoking a fact. Nobody overtly says that they're like, oh, well, because of Jesus, thanks be to God, my cat is gray. Thanks be to God, dinner is ready. No one does that. That would be an explicit use of that. Like, it's unclear what Darth is trying to say here. Like, is explicit or implicit like a mental state? I don't will myself to think that before I invoke a fact, so I guess I must just be implicitly denying him. The opposite is true. If Darth's worldview is true, when I invoke a fact, I'm implicitly affirming his God. I don't understand why he cannot fucking fathom this. That's a win for him. If Darth Dawkins' view is true, that God is the ultimate creator of the universe upon which all things are contingent and they derive and depend upon him, anytime I refer to something in the actual world, it implicitly reinforces and reaffirms the existence of that God who made that thing possible. Implicitly. That is a win for Darth. If it's not the case that that's happening, then I am implicitly reaffirming that it's just the thing. This makes no sense where he's trying to go with this. Like, you're denying God in that sense. What difference would it make if someone did or didn't? A non-believer is still affirming the existence of the creator God if in fact the creator God is true. This is a central tenet to presuppositional thinking. And it doesn't make sense that if you deny that, like, well, no, I explicitly deny that God, or I implicitly deny it, or whatever. Well, you're just doing it in a roundabout way because you're trying to say facts are somehow independent of this God. Yeah. So, well, you're wrong, and here's why. Like that. Why am I wrong? Well, you can't have a foundation of knowledge unless you assume the truth of the Christian God. Okay. Well, then you need to demonstrate how that's necessary. Because as far as that has never been the case. If it were the case, Christianity would not be shaped the way that it is.
Well, also explicitly.
Okay, no, now you're contradicting yourself because earlier you said you were not a classical atheist, that you weren't explicitly denying God. So now you're changing your tune. So tell me,
I have more reasons than one.
I thought Darth said that he was implicitly denying him. This does not make sense.
Tell me why there is no ultimate creator God.
Because the ultimate part doesn't make sense.
No evidence.
Okay. Is that a claim?
No evidence.
Okay. When you say there's no,
what difference would that make? Why would you ask a person a question and then have them respond and say, is that a claim? It's probably going to be a claim if you're asking them for the reasons why they disbelieve in God. Yeah, they're going to give you a claim.
no evidence for God, are you asserting that all the facts that you're acquainted with cannot and do not stand in causal relations to God?
Oh, for Christ's sake! God damn it! Van Til needed to hear this. Bonson needed to hear this. It doesn't. It doesn't goddamn matter. It can't matter because that's epistemology, not ontology. You could be a Christian and think that everything belongs to God. You can be a pagan and think, or be an atheist and think that nothing is attributed to God. One of these people, both of them can actually be wrong. It's unlikely that the Christian is right. I'm gonna go out on that right out on that limb. But the idea that you have to know that in order to somehow know anything else about the world following that, in order to make any of these kinds of claims, does not make sense. And if you're going to say that that's the case, and then try to work back from that to show that, aha, atheist, you have no grounds to work from, therefore you can't make any of these claims justifiable one way or the other. So I don't have to take anything into account that you say. That makes even less sense. You can't work back from a person's claims and say, oh, you didn't start with God, so I can just erase all your claims and pretend that none of them have any validity. And you ask why? Like, well, because you didn't assume the foundation. You didn't assume the correct foundation. You didn't assume the truth of the Christian God before you made those claims. And because you didn't, nothing that you said it could be correct. All right, work back from that and tell me how I got that wrong. And now I would also like to know, when you claim that all this stuff is dependent, including establishing facts, invoking facts, as Darth always calls it, what are we supposed to do when one of these Christians, implicitly or explicitly affirming the existence of God, announces the existence of evil? The invocation of the fact is dependent upon God. The invoker is dependent upon God. And the thing that they're talking about, if it's a fact, and it has to be a fact because this person is assuming the truth of the Christianity, the truth of Christianity, the truth of Christian God, and that they were created by God. So check one, check two, and then they say evil is real. Not a controversial thing for Christians to say. That evil is completely dependent, and our comprehension of evil, our ability to sum up what evil is, our ability to evaluate what evil is entirely dependent upon assuming the truth of the Christian God. In the same way that the ontology of evil is dependent on that God, which means evil is entirely dependent upon God. I don't understand why these guys don't get this. If you're going to use these kinds of properties and kind of insist that this is how badass and complete and all-powerful your God is going to have some bad stuff in there with him, namely evil. And unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get out of this thing and say, well, he's got some catastrophes in there, some acts of God, quote unquote. No, those don't count. Natural evil can exist with a God with the properties that Darth's talking about. They're all going to be moral evil. Anything that happens he knows about, and whether he does something about them or not, it could be malicious. They're all acts of moral evil at that point. So God is on a different moral scale than us and is also being held to a different standard. This is devastating for these guys. I don't know why Darth would even play in this pool. It would be really, really good if he got out of this.
Oh, I see what you're doing. That's right. Yeah.
Answer the question, or you're going to get server muted.
I just said yes. I already said yes.
You think you're going to get server muted again?
Okay. How did you determine? How did you determine that any fact does not stand in causal relations to or with God? How did
Darth establish that any facts don't stand in causal relation to Allah? How did he rule that out? Because it sounds like Darth is dangerously living in a world with a worldview where he's denying the existence of Allah. And with that denial, because he cannot assert facts, and he's not, if he's not going to assert facts while making that assumption, then there's no reason to take into anything that he says into account. He's hopelessly lost.
determine?
Because you don't need those axioms. You can
No. It's not an axiom. When you say you don't need it, you're just repeating the same claim again in different words. When you say you don't need God, that's an implicit. You're just making the same claim again. How did you determine that God is not the ultimate starting and reference point as to why anything began to exist or remains into existence? How did you determine that?
How did I determine that? Did I guess I missed the memo where it was determined that that was the case. This is classic just burden shifting. Hey, how did you determine that all of reality wasn't created by the super reality maker over here, my buddy Yahweh / Jesus? Know him? He's 3 in 1. No, Darth, I didn't establish that because it has not been established that that dude did make it. So I didn't go about my day being like, hey, you know what? No, reality was not established by an ultimate creator being who's also a threefer. Pixar, it didn't happen, Darth. I mean, what the hell do you want people to start telling you at this point?
Well, in general, like I'm a mathematician. I'll answer your question. So, as a mathematician, I believe a lot of mathematics, and I like to believe.
Okay, stop. Stop with the bullshitting and the filibustering. That is not answering my.
He hasn't even finished a thought. How does he filibustering at this point? I think in order to filibuster, you have to at least get 3 or 4 statements out minimum before somebody interrupts you. Pat says, I find it funny that Darth uses the word invoke in light of its ancient association with magic, the invocation of. Maybe it's his reliance upon the truth of a magical worldview. I think I did go off on a weird little tangent on all my tangents could be a little weird, on one of my previous videos where I talked about the fact that he uses that particular word. And invoke, I mean, it's not necessarily controversial to use the word in the way that he's using it. But it is odd that he's like, well, when you invoke a fact, it's like, okay, so when I invoke something, I'm essentially with my words casting a spell upon the world and citing something about reality that is referring back to something. I will give you this. I'll grant you this. That language is evocative of that kind of magic, and it's interesting that Darth grounds it in the idea like, well, when you have to assume the truth of Christianity before you invoke a fact, like. Okay, so in the same way, Peter Pan can fly only when he thinks a happy thought. Like that's what makes the fairy dust work.
The question: how mathematics are abstract objects? What we're talking about is.
I know, right? April, yeah, it's 2023. Darth, get a better microphone. I mean, they're not expensive at this point. The one that I'm wearing right now sounds a lot better than his, and I think it cost me like $16. It's just a headset, but. Also, I'm pretty sure Darth Dawkins is usually, I think he's on earpads or earbuds, the AirPods, through a tablet. And if that's what he's, because it sounds remote enough that that's what he's using. I don't think he's using either a dedicated mic, like a boom mic, even with a headset. He's just using in-ear pods. AJ writes, according to Darth, if you can't provide an ontological justification for everything you don't affirm to exist, then your worldview isn't coherent. He's a very silly man. Agreed. That is weird.
It's a concrete world. Explain to me why any singular fact. Listen carefully, smartass.
He's a smartass now because he's laughing at you.
You're not as smart as you are. Okay. Now, explain to me why anything.
And actually, Mathematician may not have been laughing at him. That other Skylar guy might have.
Singular or collective group of facts do not derive or depend upon God for their existence. How did you determine that?
I don't have to prove something doesn't I don't have to prove non-claims.
See everybody what he's doing? He's now running away. You asserted that the
That's true. That's true, April. He has said that.
Facts that you're acquainted with cannot and do not stand in causal relations to God as the ultimate starting point. Now, what is the ultimate ground as to why anything exists that is not God? What is it?
That's a good question. I'll answer it. It's the hold on. It's the correspondence theory of truth.
Okay, so now you're bullshitting. You know you're bullshitting. I know you're
the exact answer.
No, the correspondence of truth is not,
instead.
that's an epistemological frame of reference. That is not an ontological question.
Well, at least Dart's admitting that. Okay, so So in order for me to know anything ontological, I have to be certain about ontology. Why? And again, I would also like to know that if this is the case, the entailments, the ramifications for what this means for sin and sin nature are massive. I've gone on at length about them multiple times. So explain to us again, Darth, like how are we supposed to reconcile the noetic effects of sin, being blinkered by sin, original sin, and thinking things are good when they are in fact bad, when I can't even talk about the color of the sky outside without invoking and affirming the truth of the God of Christianity. This makes little sense to me. And here's the thing, everyone, not a spoiler, no presup or anyone else who engages in like like tends to trickle this stuff in with transcendental arguments about God or ontological arguments about God or whatever can make this connection. I have never heard an explanation bridging this gap.
I'm asking you an
That's
ontological.
an ontological question.
Yeah. Listen, dude, you're on thin ice right now. If you don't stop bullshitting, you're going to get server muted because you're not being sincere right now. You're pretending like you're okay. All right, server muted. We're done. Okay. See, this is what they do. This is what they do. They just outright lie, pretending they're still in the game, but he's not in the game, right?
Well, I mean, the one person who's should be definitely out of the game at this point is Gary, Darth Gary Dawkins, because holy shit, this is some weak sauce.
He told me that facts don't need God. Well, how do you know that? He says the correspondence theory of truth. I mean, this was a non-answer that he just gave. That has nothing to do, it's not germane to the question at hand. How did he determine? By what means?
Right. I thought the good folks at the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy had suspended Darth's ability to use the terms ontology. You know what, Pat? If they haven't, they should. And also, they need to reach out to Webster's and other referencing, like the Encyclopedia Britannica, and get Darth to stop talking about dictionary entries and encyclopedia entries as if they legislate the meaning of words. Because he's been doing that for years. I don't think he's going to stop. Yeah, AJ. So, and according to these precept clowns, there is no such thing as a worldview neutral statement. So all of these supposed universal declarations about how worldviews work only apply to Darth's worldview. Right. And it also, not coincidentally, the only worldview that actually exists is the Christian worldview. Any other quote unquote worldview is somehow a deficient or blinkered version of the actual Christian worldview. We need the Christian worldview in order to fill out the missing aspects of our worldview, like how do we determine like good and bad and good and ugly and beautiful and these kinds of things. We need that God worldview in order for us to do that. But you can't have that. It's like, okay, so there is only one worldview, and it's the Christian worldview. And then there's some of us that are wandering around thinking maybe the Christian worldview isn't a thing, but because Darth and others will come along and say, you have to assume the truth of Christianity for a foundation of knowledge to be a thing. But they can't demonstrate it.
Deduction, okay? Pure reason that things exist with complete metaphysical independence from God? No, he didn't. See, this is why it's so nauseating talking with most atheists, because they are shameless about lying and pretending like they're still in the game, pretending that they're giving sincere answers when they're just bullshitting, okay? So when he said the correspondence theory of truth, that in no way answered the question whatsoever how he determined how a tree blowing in the wind exists with complete independence, metaphysical independence from God, right? So what do? They lie and to pretend like they're still in the game. And he was warned several times not to do this, but he decided he wanted to quadruple down online, so we're done with him. But
what's the fifth book of the
you're gonna play this little game?
Can you answer what the fifth book of the Quran is?
No, I can't.
So why not?
Because I have enough.
Then what does that say about your standard?
Sir, because the
Hey,
So if anybody, I think going forward, that's the biggest thing that, despite all my ranting and tangential arguments, the biggest thing going forward is if he tries to break that thing out. Remember, I think that he would probably insist. It's interesting to me. He doesn't care how many people have told him especially skeptics, have said that they've read the Bible, all the books of the Bible, multiple times, and that sometimes on multiple occasions they've read the Bible from cover to cover, as recommended to them by a Christian that they know. And yet, despite the fact that they've done that, and they might have a really good understanding of some Christian concepts or not, Darth will basically just say it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how much of the Bible that you've read. It doesn't matter how much study that you've done. If you disagree with Darth, you haven't studied enough because you didn't get it right. And by right, I mean you don't agree with Darth. And clearly that double standard is here because he doesn't need to have read all of the Quran. The Quran is not the Bible. Therefore, it wouldn't matter if Darth Dawkins had only read the Quran on the front of the edition that he happened to see at a bookstore. That's all he has to know. That's all he has to read to know that it's incorrect. He just has to, there's a book over there that talks about a religion other than Christianity. By definition, it's false. That's the standard he's going to lean into. He doesn't care if that makes him a hypocrite or sound like an idiot. Because if he cared about sounding like an idiot, he wouldn't have been on the internet terminally for 13 years. But again, what do you do? Your cut, did you say anytime my cut is 60% red? Well, after YouTube's 80% cut, so yeah, 60% of nothing is still nothing. So I'll send you a Christmas card. I think that might come out of the fund. Thank you, John. YouTube really does I mean, I appreciate the super chats. I really do. The fact that people want to donate to the channel, I do appreciate that. But YouTube does take a healthy chunk off that. So, but yeah. So for all of you that have shown up, thank you very much for being here for the live chat. I really appreciate it. Like, subscribe, do all that, or don't, but share it out. See what you think. Maybe others will watch this stuff too. Darth is a nuisance, but he's a nuisance that just keeps giving. And thank you for the super chats. I do appreciate those as well. I will be back to review probably, like I said, I probably will hit up that terms of service violation one that Tom dropped because that's a shorter one. And I'm hoping that I will be able to get to a longer review of the one that dropped between Darth Dawkins and I don't know what the name of the user is, but he's a biologist and they have like a 48 or 50-minute long conversation. So I'm thinking maybe I'll do that one Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon, something like that. Here's the Darth whispered. Yeah, but I'm not allowed to speak to him. Isn't that a kick in the pants? Pat says, at his core, DD is a charlatan bent upon being a keyboard crusader for his own ego. He doesn't read Greek or Hebrew, and he isn't a true theologian. Yeah, and I think really at the end of the day, I kind of wish he would run into Christians that were like that, Christians that did go to seminary and would kind of do that. I don't think that they would, though. I think most of the time, like seminarians and stuff, if they've have they gone to at least seminary, gone further, and they've gotten into being able to read Hebrew and Greek, would try to be conciliatory to what Dawkins is doing because they really think that he's on a crusade. They think he's on a ministry. Like, oh well, I don't want to step on his toes because maybe he can convert some people. And I really do think that if there are anybody that's like that out there, that's inclined towards Christianity in that way, and you do understand some of the stuff, you've got a little critical history in your, critical understandings of approaching the literature, the language, translations, interpretations, I think you guys actually have an obligation to talk to guys like Darth Dawkins and shut some of this stuff up. The philosophical stuff, that seminarians are probably going to get a little bit, if they're not philosophically inclined, they're going to get floored with that too. Like, who wants to deal with precept? Next to nobody. Precept's weird. It's obnoxious. It's entertaining because it usually comes out of the mouths of insane morons like Darth. But other than that, it's just trash. But when somebody's going out and attempting to communicate to people, well, here's some clear distinctions between Christianity and Islam, and all he's doing is peddling ignorant nonsense that is just so easy. You can debunk it with a Google search. That's the kind of stuff that really needs to, people need to like step up and be like, yeah, no, you're wrong. Like, I don't have to be a Muslim. I'm not trying to even defend the Muslim faith. I have no reason to. I'm not in that faith tradition. But wrong is wrong. Ignorance is ignorance. And people like Darth should not be allowed to get away with that shit and then walk around and crow about how right they are and how kick-ass a Christian warrior they are. He's a clown, and he makes his own faith tradition look worse for taking stances like this. So, and with that, I will thank you all for the thanks. Darth doesn't like Dr. Josh. No, he does not. He does not like Dr. Josh at all. I will say goodbye. But with that, I think we're about ready to get out of here. Thank you all again for being here, and love and support and hate and, ridicule that you may send my way. I like it all. But yeah, I think we're about ready to get out of here. I will sign off on this one, and I will see you guys next time. Also remember, happy 62nd birthday to Darth Dawkins. Good night, everybody.